Today we'll talk about the passive voice using Unit 7.2 of your focus book and Unit 20 of your grammar book. Let's start. We'll be using some sentences from this text about fair trade to talk about the structure of the passive voice. Before going straight into that, let's look at what fair trade really is about. As you can probably tell from the term, fair trade is a system and a trend that is developed to ensure trading that is fair, especially to farmers in any third world countries. In this system, farmers have to guarantee that their products are not grown with harmful chemicals and that their labors are not exploited. And all of the produce from these farmers will be handled and traded to other parts of the world in a fair way, mostly ensuring that the farmers will receive a fair price for the fruits of their hard work so that they can have the resources to support their own lives and to give back to the communities that they live in. This is a trend that has been around for a long time. It is still growing and is worth supporting. Now let's take a look at the structure of the passive voice. As you should already know, the so-called passive voice takes the form of be and a past participle. The active voice has different tenses and the passive voice also has different tenses. Here are some examples. In the first paragraph, you see two examples of the passive voice in the present tense form. So, the word be now takes the form of are and aren't. In the second paragraph, you see the passive voice in the present perfect tense, and therefore the word be now takes the form of have been. If you read on, you'll see that, like any other verb, the word be takes the base form after the modal verb can. And in the last paragraph, we also have an example of the passive voice in the past tense. The passive voice is not about tenses, but it's more about how you structure your sentences. If you want to start with the performer of the action, then you use the active voice. If you want to highlight what's been done to something and you want to start the sentence with the object, then you would use the passive voice. Now let's look at exercise 4 on page 86 of your focus book. All the examples from the text can be grouped into these three tenses as we've talked about. Now let's go a little bit further and see the difference between the active voice and the passive voice. To make the examples clearer, we'll use a verb that shows the use of the past participle more clearly. We'll use the verb eat. In the active voice, we would say he eats in the present simple tense, he ate in the past simple tense, and in the present perfect tense, we would say he has eaten. When you want to change all three sentences to the passive voice, do notice that the tense doesn't change. Here are the passive examples. In the present simple tense, he is eaten. In the past simple tense, he was eaten. In the present perfect tense, he has been eaten. You may feel a little bit puzzled right now because although I'm changing the sentence from the active voice to the passive voice, they are still starting with the same subject. That is deliberate because I want to show you the importance of using the correct voice, active or passive, when you write a sentence. If you want to tell your friend that you have had breakfast, there is quite a significant difference between saying I have eaten and I have been eaten. They're both in the present perfect tense, but the meaning, as you can really tell, is very, very different. Now let's try another exercise. You have 30 seconds to complete exercise 5. For each question, notice the meaning of the verb and then pay attention to whether the sentence begins with the object, that is the receiver of the action, or the subject, that is the doer of the action. Let's check the answers. As you can see, aside from questions 3 and 4, all of the other ones are in the passive form because those sentences begin with the object, that is the receiver of the action. You have 1 minute to complete exercise 6. I've highlighted some of the keywords that can help you decide on the tenses to use, but for the rest of them, you'll have to decide. You have 1 minute. Let's check the answers. For the questions without time words as clues, questions 2, 6, and 8 are all in the present tense because they are talking about facts. There is no other information telling us these sentences are describing something in another time frame. Question 3 is special because when you tell someone about your shoes, these are shoes you already own, then they must have been made, and the making process is in the past. Therefore, we use the past tense to describe that they were made in Italy. For question 5, it is possible to write, I had never been stopped by the police until that time 2 years ago. However, since we once again do not have any extra information to place it in a specific time frame, we can't decide whether it's in the past or the future. We would use the present perfect tense, which is also a clue given by the instructions telling you to only choose from the present simple, past simple, or the present perfect. On page 78 of your grammar book, you see another list of examples showing the passive voice in different tenses. This is still not a complete list, but just know that whatever tense you can think of, you can always use it in the active or the passive voice. There are a few reasons for us to use the passive voice, one of which is, as we've mentioned, when we want to restructure the sentence and move important information, that is the object of the action, to the beginning of the sentence. Usually we do this to highlight the object of the sentence. We also use the passive voice when we want to be more impersonal or objective, or when it is obvious who performed the action. Say when we have a full paragraph about one person doing something, we don't have to keep mentioning that person, but we can focus on the action or the object instead. A lot of people say the passive voice is what we should use in formal writing, but it is not really the case. In fact, we would still prefer the active voice because it is more direct in expressing meaning, and only use the passive voice for the above reasons that we've just mentioned. While all verbs can take the active form, not all of them can take the passive form. We know that the structure of a passive voice sentence has to begin with the receiver of the action, and therefore we can only use the passive voice with verbs that can be followed by objects, as you can see in these two examples. And when you're writing passive voice sentences, if you still feel it is important to mention the person who did the action, you can use the preposition by to introduce that person. But we usually only do this when it is necessary. If we say 2 men were arrested, it's obvious that it's done by the police. But if you brought lunch to school, you might want to proudly tell your friends that the lunchbox is made by yourself or by your family. If there's a tool involved in the action that you're writing about, you can also introduce the tools using the preposition with. just like how we would usually use the preposition. Now please complete page 79 and we'll check the answers for this page and go through pages 80 to 81 when we meet on Thursday. I'll see you then.